Welcome to episode 11 of The Equity Partner. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing Aubrey Bibbs. Aubrey is a personal friend of mine. I've known Aubrey for, probably 30 years, growing up together. And Aubrey, we had a recent conversation about his journey, about him being an investor, a long-term investor, and also a trader. And he currently owns a company, an organization called Absolute Truth. And I wanted him to give a chance to kind of talk about his journey, what he's doing now, kind of mentoring investors, some of the novice investors, and also investors that don't have trading experience. And I appreciate you joining me, and I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, appreciate you having me. Great to be here, Jeff.
No, absolutely, man. So talk a little bit about just your personal background. For those, since I've known you for so long, there's a lot of people that don't know you. And just tell me a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. So native of Hampton Roads, Virginia. Seven cities we like to call it, 757 area code for those that like to do area codes. Born and raised, whole life there. Not much exposure outside of Hampton Roads, which I bring it up because I think that matters a lot for people when you talk about environment and how that plays on actions that you take later on in life. But yeah, spent my entire life in Hampton Roads, to include joining the military from there, enlisted into the Marine Corps fresh out of high school. Growing up, I was typical teenager from low socioeconomic status area in that I played sports just like you did, Jeff, and most of our friends, right? Multi-sport athlete. I did well academically. Even though I did well academically, didn't go to college right away. As I mentioned, joined the Marine Corps, enlisted in 2000, fresh out of high school. Spent 10 years enlisted, and then I converted over to the officer side in the Marine Corps. Spent 10 years as an officer, artillery, great time. And I just recently retired, 20 years. Got my degree out of Old Dominion University in applied mathematics. And now I primarily trade and invest and work on absolute truth for a living. That's what I do with my days nowadays. That's pretty much, my story in a nutshell. That's a whole other story about the details, but in a nutshell, that's me and what I've done over the past 20 years.
What did you take from the military this kind of led you to, getting your degree, and then also just doing trading and investing on a full-time basis now?
Yeah, the military, in terms of degree, you don't have a choice. That's a requirement if you want to be an officer.
Okay.
So that was part of the process to meet the criteria to get commissioned as an officer in the Marine Corps.
Hmm.
I chose a degree I did, applied mathematics, because Jeff, but most of my life I love numbers, I love mathematics. Um, in high school, I took advanced placement calculus, and so it's always been something that I love. I had affinity for was numbers and mathematics and statistics and actuarial sciences. I actually wanted to be an actuary when I was in high school.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, a lot of kids. Like, how many kids, think about being an actuary? But that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go to Drake University. Um, but life happens where we're from, and that didn't pan out that way. But my vision was to always be a high school math teacher
Hmm.
because of the experiences I had as a kid from a lower socioeconomic status, dealing with not knocking the personalities of those educators in my life at the time. But to be honest, culturally, they didn't relate to me and they
Yeah.
didn't know how to, like, honestly approach me in a social way in a classroom setting from adult to child. And so I spent a lot of my higher level math courses feeling like I was by myself. And quite frankly, I did have to do a lot of it on my own and by myself. A good friend of ours, um, I won't just be I won't say names, right? But a good friend of ours that played basketball with us
Mm-hmm.
in my calculus class in high school, he was a grade above us. One probably about 2 weeks, 3 weeks in, they gave students that were struggling, not struggling necessarily, I don't want to put it out there like that, but felt like maybe it was too much of a load for them academically
Mm-hmm.
to get out of that course.
Mm-hmm.
And the two other students of color got out of that course, right? But so I bring it up because it's not about color, but for children, a lot of it, because of our social environment, is about people that look like you and are from where you from. So that's the first step of just like human nature, relationships. Like they look
Yeah.
like me, they act like me, they're from where I'm from. It's the way it is, right?
Yeah.
So for me as a young adult, still a child, I don't even want to say young adult, as a child, growing into adulthood, that was a challenge for me because all those other students didn't live where we lived, right? They
Yeah.
didn't ride the same bus that we rode,
Yeah.
and a lot of our parents, like mine, didn't have the time or the resources to take me across town to go study with these other students.
Yeah.
So it's that type of stuff that drove me to want to be a high school math teacher.
Hmm.
So actually, after I retired, I actually taught high school math for half a school year.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
But I learned a lot.
well, and to be honest, man, I think it's needed to have, adults or young adults from the same social and economic background that
Yes,
can provide some of the expertise and speak the language of a community that might not be within that school system. And
absolutely.
and it's bad enough there's not a lot of male teachers,
Yes.
but black male teachers is something I think is needed as well.
Yeah, you're right. And let me not answer your question, but tie in the Marine
Hmm.
Corps to that. When I saw the Marine Corps recruiter, the first time I saw the recruiter, because as you just mentioned, the preponderance of the kids from the school that you and I attended, the the storyline, the narrative is you will go to college. There's almost like no other alternative, right?
Yeah.
So for us who again weren't used to that and didn't have that exposure, we got used to hearing it at least indirectly.
Hmm.
And so it became to be somewhat of an expectation for us because as you know, most of our friends
Yep.
went on to get higher education.
Yep.
But I because of that, I used to blow off the recruiter like the first couple of years, like our sophomore year, our
Yep.
junior year. And then later on in our junior year, when I decided I really didn't want to go to college for a lot of reasons related to socioeconomic status,
Hmm.
mainly to help my mother, single parent household, I decided to have a conversation with a recruiter and the things that they talk about, right? It's their job, right? They sell you the intangibles, they sell you the tangibles, but I was one of those kids who I really wanted the intangibles. I've always
Yeah.
been that type of way, right? Where I wanted, brotherhood, to be able to network,
Yeah.
opportunity. I always, even at a young age, understood the on the back end what it means to have access and exposure to opportunity.
Yeah.
So the Marine Corps, what I learned from the Marine Corps in 20 years was I got a lot of those intangibles that going back to that vision of being a teacher, whether it's in a traditional setting or through my own, through a coaching and mentoring business, I learned a lot of skills to help me bridge the gap of those cultural,
Hmm.
hurdles that I talked about that a lot of those educators struggle with.
Yeah.
They teach that now, and it's the genesis. It's very rudimentary. They
Yeah.
don't get a lot of skill sets, at least from what I've seen in my little time and exposure in the education system. But I have a lot of friends who are in that system, and they would probably, agree with my comment about there's still a long way to go in teaching educators
Hmm.
about cultural differences and techniques to bridge those gaps. You
Yep.
you get that in the Marine Corps. You don't have a choice, right?
Yeah.
You go to boot camp. You're in a platoon with call it 80 other, in my case, 80 other men, and you guys take a shower together
Yeah.
every day, right? Whether they black, white, from Virginia, from Texas, from
Yeah.
Oklahoma, it don't matter. Whether they Republican, Democrat. So you learn how to navigate that system very well the longer you do it.
Yeah.
That's what I got from the Marine Corps in regards to your question.
I talk about that all the time about how important it is to ingrain yourself in different environments and different cultures because we live in a diverse world. And so I think, my experience is probably very similar to yours, where you can probably sit in different rooms and still communicate, still get to know people, still understand how people work, and because you've been placed in different environments that have made you adjust. I always think about my first day at our high school, and how different it was
Right.
for us. But that, somebody being willing to put themselves in an environment, or a parent pushing them in an environment that they're not comfortable with, can sometimes be a better, they can have a better outlook on life, because they figured out how to navigate, and that we're more similar than we are different. So
Absolutely.
so it sounds like a lot of that from your background is kind of how you got to where you are today. So talk. So you retire from the military, and then, where did you begin investing? Talk about your investment journey, and then kind of how where you are today with Absolute Truth.
Sure. So technically, the investing started probably 2 or 3 years into my military career, through a mentor, or you know what? It's a group of mentors. Um, Within that group of mentors, some were a lot more intimate mentee relationships than others, but they all had very drastic um, and long-standing impact on my personal development in that space. Um, Let me back up a bit, because I think this is important, at least for me. My original journey into investing came through like consumer advocacy and consciousness and awareness of um, my level of consumerism,
Mm-hmm.
and my family's level of consumerism. And so it started off with books like Richest Man in Babylon, uh,
Mm-hmm.
David Box, Automatic Millionaire. I never really got into Dave Ramsey at the outset, but those are some of the examples. Clark Howard
Mm-hmm.
and his podcast, a lot of that went on in my household and on family drives out of town.
Oh yeah.
So that was the real catalyst that got me into investing, really into the literature beyond what my mentors were pushing to me through things like in my department, we would play The Rat Race by Robert Kiyosaki like once a month in the back office during lunch hour. And again, for a kid like me, I'm like, what is this? A balance sheet, right? Assets, liabilities,
Yeah.
assets bringing me income. Like, this is for real. Like,
Yeah.
people have this thing called a balance sheet, and they have an asset, which, in some cases, let's talk about a house that for most people is just, quite frankly, a liability in all practicality. And you're telling me that there are people out there that, owner occupy, for an example, and then move out, and now that thing is bringing them income. I think that's how most people
Yep.
get bit. Robert Kiyosaki's book is a catalyst for a lot of people, whether they stick that route or they
Yep.
wind up coming my route, with the stock market,
Yep.
because he talks about that right in the book. And in Rat Race, that's a component of passive income, and he does it purely through stock appreciation. He doesn't really touch on dividends
Yep.
or options or things like that. But nonetheless, it's enough for somebody who's ignorant or doesn't come from that environment to, if you can pick up on it, be like, hey, where is there more information about this? And
Yep.
back to my original point, I had mentors around me who not only could recommend me literature, and they have firsthand experience, they can take a look at my situation. And again, they weren't advisors, but to draft up and say, hey, you can talk to this person, or you can talk to this service, or if you start this, here's what the typical outcome is. So whether it winds up being the end game, that's not so much the point as you getting into that space of financial literacy.
Yep.
And that's what happened to me. So I had a lot of mentors, and eventually my first intro to investing was through your traditional, employer 401k, which in the military is called the Thrift Savings Plan, TSP for short. And
Yep.
that was my intro, was just a small percentage of my paycheck, every check, going into the TSP, and me understanding the different type of funds that exist within the TSP structure, right? Small cap, large cap, international, fixed, government, and then you look at the different life cycle fund. So like,
Yep.
why would I want a life cycle versus you're not really self-directed, but versus this other allocation mix. So
Yep.
that really got me just, again, I love, just information and numbers. So getting back to that. So I would just eat that stuff up. I'd be
Yep.
like, all right, I'm done with these, but give me something that has facts and data, like empirical information. So
Yep.
I got tired of, not tired, I still love the Clark Howards and even like I said, I've never really been a Dave guy. I listen to Dave, Susie, Rick Edelman, all those folks. I like them, and I still listen from time to time. But my natural tendency was show me some empirical data, show me some strategy that's backed by mathematics or statistics that I can say, yep, I can calculate the growth, right?
Yep.
Even with putting things in like sequence of return and average rates of return from the stock market for the last 10 years or 50. I can make a pretty predictable expectation from certain type of investment. So
Yep.
that's it's just my personality and people around me. I think I was very, very blessed uh,
Mm-hmm.
to be in that environment and be aware enough and have the courage enough to say, teach me a little bit more about that, because a lot of people in my environment didn't do that. They had all of these resources around them and just go about their daily life of just being a consumer.
Yep.
Again, I'm not gonna say that to criticize, but I know we're gonna get into it later, but for me, I think that's sad, which is why I'm such a huge advocate for financial literacy.
Mm-hmm.
It's so simple to change that narrative and paradigm for us to naturally be okay with asking people about money instead of looking at it as a taboo topic,
Yep.
even when
Exactly.
it's people that you know.
Mm-hmm. So
So
so when you started traditionally, like most people, is you started investing in your retirement plan,
absolutely.
and then how did you move? It sounds like you read a lot. You had mentors that kind of guided you in the direction of saying, I want to do self-directed. And so
Yep.
what did the next step look like?
So it's mainly personality. So again, I've never been the type that was afraid to take an action or have a loss.
Okay.
So that's that's that seems to be the hang up or the hurdle for most, is taking that first step. For example, to be a self-directed investor, if you're in the military and you invest in a TSP, or anybody, the first thing you would need to do is open up an online brokerage account. Or
Yep.
if we're talking about decades ago, like talk to a TD Ameritrade, a broker, right? A brokerage house, a representative, and open up an account, right? Back then it wasn't online. So no matter what, like that first step is that. And
Yep.
most people will shoot themselves down in the process of liftoff to get there with a whole bunch of questions that honestly don't mean much. Like, and how much do I have to fund the account with? Are they going to ask me to place a? Like, you can ask those questions, but even when people get the answers, a lot of time there's fear, lack of knowledge,
Yep.
literacy that will stop people in their tracks. So for me, I've always been a person of action, because you can't get from A to B without
Yep.
taking the first step, or getting in your vehicle, whatever the analogy. So for me, I said, okay, let's try it. And a tenet of investing is, right, diversification, allocation, mix, not putting all your eggs in one basket. So for me, I can always say, well, I don't have to swing for the fence.
That's
If
right.
if I'm a try, let's say I open a brokerage account and I'm studying um, penny stock strategies, which I don't advocate and I'm not a fan of anymore. But I've been there, right? But it was nothing for me to say, okay, I've saved up, call it a $500. We talking penny stocks. I'm a play around with $100
Mm-hmm.
and see where that takes me over the next 90 days, and have a very top level plan,
Yep.
investment strategy, trading strategy rather, and just see how it goes. The on the back end, my mindset was, if I lost that $100, at least I gained knowledge and experience,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
which to me was far valuable for the $100.
Yeah.
Right? I looked at it like formal education. That was why, that's what drove me to the next step or trying something else. This didn't work. Okay, let's try this strategy, because one, I always had a bias for action, which again is a military trait.
Yeah.
that it just enhanced that innate trait in me. And then two, again, being a data-driven individual, all the information is available for you to see how many people acquire wealth, generational wealth through the stock market.
Yeah.
You just got to figure out somebody to show you how to do it, or just go through the experiences yourself and figure it out. But you'll get there.
Yeah. I think it's enough resources out there today. If you're willing to put the time in, you can definitely begin your journey of investing. And I think a lot of people think about investing like gambling, where it's like, if I put my money out there, it's going to be gone in 3 to 6 months. But just like you said, if you're a data driven person and you can look at the history of either the company or the fund, then that can give you at least a higher probability of success kind of going forward. And it sounds
Right.
like that's what you've used to kind of drive you to investing in general.
Yep.
So you started off doing self-directed accounts. You were investing in it sounds like quality companies, and just talk about your long-term investment strategy, and then also the second part to that is then getting into trading options.
Yeah. Okay. So my long-term investing strategy was, at the time, at the very beginning, was rooted in what most of the literature that anybody will find promotes. To be specific, that's the nest egg method. I call it the nest egg method, or people refer to it the method that you use if you build up a nest egg. They use a drawdown rate formula, right? Most people
Yep.
use a 4% drawdown rate or 3% drawdown rate. So again, it's about exposure and access. So what I was exposed to and have access, or was able to find exposure and access to,
Mm-hmm.
primarily talked about that strategy. So the alternative was probably like stuff in the mattress, right?
Oh yeah.
or a la the bank. It's the same thing, right? Stuff in the mattress,
Mm-hmm.
put your money in a money market account. It's the same in my
Yeah.
mind, right? When you look at inflation. So for me, I didn't want the alternative, and the only other thing I knew was build up this nest egg, right? You can look at what age you start versus when you want to retire. We know the formula, Jeff.
Yep.
So that was my formula. That's the only other recipe I knew. So that's why I started. It's better than nothing, and I don't knock that method at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's a lot of case studies. If you look at like the Millionaire Next Door,
Mm-hmm.
and again, David Bott, Automatic Millionaire, where people have $50,000 a year jobs and wind up with net
Mm-hmm.
worth of liquid assets of over $1 million.
Absolutely.
So cool. But I know that is, and let me be careful because I don't want to give off the impression that I'm trying to get rich, or I was trying to get rich quick. But that is the snail method. And getting rich generationally relatively is a snail method. But if what I think I'm now more um, open to, and what I advocate for more, if I think that in itself is really quite unquote a snail method,
Mm-hmm.
mainly because of, I don't like to make it about situation, but if you weren't born into a wealthy family with a lot of knowledge about how to generate wealth, right, through money, like not exchanging time for it, then you're already on the snail route.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's what I mean. So, but if you're on the snail route, and then you can, let's talk about it like the analogy of asset vehicles as an actual vehicle. And you're a snail and you hop in a carriage that's pulled by a snail versus you hop in a snail car, right? Like that's, to me, hopping in a carriage pulled by snails is what the whole safe withdrawal rate formula is predicated upon. Like
Yeah.
you putting in some percentage of your income every month, right? Dollar cost averaging
Yeah.
based on your age and when you want to retire and what you expect the rate of return will be. And you're using dividend reinvestment plan and all of that. Cool. That is you as a snail getting in a carriage pulled by a snail.
Yeah.
So when I noticed that for what it was, I said, okay, let's try this other stuff out. And again, I didn't just jump all in, right? I put, again, allocation is very important, diversification. I allocated a certain amount of funds into some other method, and I tracked, and proof the concept, as they say.
Yep.
Proof of the
Yep.
pudding is in the eating. And I start eating the pudding. And I was
Mm.
like, yeah, this is pudding. This ain't paint,
Yeah.
right? It is what it said it is. Let's
Yeah.
go.
So that you being willing to take some risk by making some investments in quality companies after doing some research kind of led you into the long-term investing. And so if I'm a novice investor and I'm thinking, okay, I'm doing what Aubrey said. I started, doing the retirement funds. I've started doing some long-term investment, and now I want to do trading and I want to trade options. Just talk from I guess more of a novice standpoint about how to get into options, how to understand it from a fundamental sense, and how can a novice investor get into trading options?
That's a great question. And there are many answers to that because trading and investing is very much personality driven.
Yeah.
I put a post up the other day, and I truly believe it. Your EQ is far more important and matters more than your IQ when it comes to trading and investing. Like, and then most people don't even know their, like, where they sit in terms of the emotional intelligence spectrum, or like just aware of how their emotions trigger actions for them specifically.
Yeah.
So what most people, a novice investor, would want to do, I would go back to traditional advice, um, which is that you can, which you can get for free anywhere, which is basically um, sit with somebody who's experienced, and even an advisor who has traditional investment means as the only thing they can push to you by law, right? So, and again, so even though that will lead you to a method that I don't necessarily agree with as a primary method to prepare for retirement financially, I will push you there because you're a novice and you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So go that route. Find an advisor, find a loved one who loves their advisor, or really likes their advisor, or is happy with their advisor, and start there.
Yeah.
Um, but in terms of the main question that comes out of what you just asked specifically, Jeff, is like, how much should I start with? What should I start investing in? Right. And it's always how much should I start with first? So I say, I treat it, and I'll go back to traditional education in terms of financial literacy in this space.
Mm-hmm.
I push what Charles Schwab put out there with a core and explore method. So, right, have some funds that you allocate, like I said, I did, for exploring those other, strategies,
Yeah.
that are self-directed trading strategies. And you can start today. Again, there's a bunch of ways you can start, but you can start today and say, I'll use a nice round number. Let's say a person allocates $1,000 worth of wealth that they have at the end of the month to savings and investing, but it's all going to long-term investing. Then maybe split that allocation and split it 80-20. So 80% of it, $800,
Yep.
goes to your long-term, you know, retirement investment account, and 200 goes into an investing account. And your goal is to build that account up to 5,000 before you start trading. And all the while, you're giving yourself time to get educated, and learn about what strategy you want to try first, right? And find a mentor, or find a trading group or something like that, a
Mm-hmm.
platform of people, a community, right? Something that you feel safe and warm at, and start studying. And let's say it takes you a year to build up that 5 grand, right? Because maybe you get some windfall money and you dump part of it there, right? Because I know the math don't work, right? If you do $200, but you get some windfall money here, you get some windfall money there, and you take
Yep.
a portion of it, and you're building up that account. And let's say it takes you a year to do that, you got a side hustle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all that while you're studying a specific plan or a specific strategy. So when you hit your 5,000, you're excited and you're ready to go, right? To try this other thing,
Yep.
right? But whether that be what I do, or real estate, or side hustle, another side hustle,
Mm-hmm.
right? That is, I think an approach that most people can get with.
What you talked about EQ, and I think it's important too, because financial advisors, one of the first things they'll ask you is about your risk tolerance. And I think, when you talk about emotional intelligence, it is, I mean, it weighs a huge, I mean, everybody will have a slightly different risk tolerance, a slightly different strategy because they're emotional about certain things. Like me specifically, I'm debt averse. And so because I'm debt averse,
Mm,
I don't mind taking risk and borrowing money for investments, or risk taking, whether it's buying real estate or investing in the stock market. But I typically will aggressively pay down debt because I've seen the worst. I guess the flip side of that is when things hit the fan. And so, but there's some people out there that will, like I was listening to something the other day and it was just saying, smart debt is good debt. And, I borrow the max amount I can borrow and put down the smallest amount I can put down. And that strategy has worked well for some, but I can give you 15 different examples that it's turned the other way for other people. But I think that's a huge part about investing too. I think that's why people get nervous about certain situations.
yeah, that's true. What you're talking about is what, again, I say is the root of it, which is literacy
Mm-hmm.
and exposure
Yep.
and discernment. Because those examples that you and I can spout off, because I can do the same. I can talk about both sides of it.
Mm-hmm.
We don't get the full story,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
for example, or you do, or rarely do you get the full story, because Grant Cardone does that, right? He talks about,
Mm-hmm.
right, but he also talks about, he continues to, pull that thread and explain to people that's because he's solvent enough for the deck,
That's
right? So even if I'm somebody like you who is debt averse, the thing about it is, going back to my example, I think what, and EQ, right? So the main drivers emotionally are with this, right? When we talk about the markets,
Yep.
is trading and investing, is greed and fear. You're particularly with the debt, right? Are it falls into the fear realm,
Yeah.
right? And that fear is rooted, again, no matter how you slice it, not completely in lack of exposure and experience enough to say, when it comes to this, it, because risk management is about uncertainty.
Yeah.
So the more you can shrink that uncertainty, right, the greater, right, you become confident with that skill set or ability, and the fear also goes down.
Yep.
So there's that, but there's always, going back to environment and what, that's deep rooted,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? So even if you get the skill set and the knowledge and the exposure to bring up your confidence, lower that fear, right? Bring down that uncertainty when it comes to risk management, you're always going to have, man, everybody I knew where I grew up that tried to go out and do this outside of the nest egg method, it ain't work. We'll find people, environments where everybody that did it, it did work.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
exists, right? But even if, again, my point is, even if you do find that neighborhood or that friend that got 10 family members who are 10 for 10 in it,
Mm-hmm.
you can be like, I don't know, because it's his 10 against your 10,
Yeah.
right? So that's inner work. That's the whole EQ, right? And then even counseling people, most people on Wall Street who are managers go to, they get counseling, right?
Mm-hmm.
They deal with personal mental issues.
Yeah.
Um, so it you have to get to know yourself, and you have to grow, and you have to learn. Don't dive in, right? Take dips, right? And that helps you gain experiences that, again, a lot of times it won't. Something just came to mind. It won't make it go away, but it helps with it. So in the military,
Mm-hmm.
certain job occupations, you don't have a choice about things you're gonna wind up doing a lot of. For example, I was an artillery officer, right? You deploy, Marine Corps is amphibious, right? You go out on ship, right? They call it a mute.
Mm-hmm.
You find yourself, right, going to training missions, going to cross decking from ship to ship, or if you're actually in the combat zone, right, flying from here, flying to there, and it's a helicopter,
Mm-hmm.
right, constantly, right? You're a combat arms individual. You might find yourself on the back of an Osprey, right? Multiple times in a day. And if you're afraid of heights, and if they got like a tail open or something like that, that's a constant thing. But my point is, the more you are a person who's afraid of heights and helicopters, the more you're in that thing, you begin to get a numbness to the dangers that are also always running around your head. But it doesn't like get rid of your fear.
Yeah.
Right. But you're like, oh, here we go again, another helicopter ride.
Yeah.
You don't freak out every helicopter ride. You might freak out your first 2 to 5. Right? But after that, you're like, this is how I get paid, this is my job. And if we talking about, getting real with it, your brothers and sisters' lives, and they depend on you being on that helicopter and getting to where they are to help them out, then you're gonna get over that.
Yeah.
So what's the parallel in life? If you have a family, if you don't have kids and you are like maybe the youngest child or the oldest child, depending on cultures, and the expectation is for you to care for mom and dad, and they're now getting elderly, and maybe mom is senile, right? Or pops has Alzheimer's, right? Delirium, like all of that, which is a reality in this nation. Healthcare costs, they can't afford it because they didn't have financial literacy, right? You will. That's what I mean about. I've always looked at things from a practical approach. I've had that blessing. I know where it came from. I think it came from my mom. I know it came from my mother, right? But I can say I know that what I'm doing right now, again, all that I've gained knowledge-wise, the skills that I can put in place, those things are going to take for me to get like 65 before I can do the things I would like to do as soon as possible with my family.
Yep.
There's other people out there doing it now. Let me figure out how they're doing it. And then if it's something that's novel to me and I don't know anybody else is doing it, what grounds me is going to help me to be able to do the things for people that I know are going to help them blossom and develop as people, right? And to be spiritual about it real quick is to help them grow as children of God, right? As spiritual beings. The more they have, the more I have, the more I can facilitate the God in me doing that and the God in them doing that.
Yep.
So that's what one of the things that drives me to have a bias for action, even if it's like, I don't know nobody I can call to ask it, right? I'm gonna figure this out, man.
Yep. And it takes that drive and initiative sometimes, especially when you come from environments where you don't have. I always talk about, we grew up in neighborhoods where we never knew a banker, or we never knew a lawyer that was a neighbor, or and so that has an impact on you. So now you got to go and network with people, you got to meet people, you have to search out for that information in order to get that information to help you be a resource and help it be resourceful for you. So I'm gonna ask you a specific question, because there's a lot of people that want to know, like, specifically, all right, what is an option contract? What is a trade? What does a trade look like? How do I execute something like that?
Right.
What are the key words and things that I should be aware of? So tell me a little bit about the specifics on options.
Man, to not take up too much time, because options
it can be a long discussion. I'm not.
Man, all kinds of approaches to try to explain it to people. But at the end of the day, what I would say to your question is, well, okay, the option itself, first and foremost, is the technical term. It's a derivative, right? That's the type of asset it is, the type of class it falls under. And it's based on some underlying asset, typically, right? Individual stock, right? Let's go with a Dow component. So Apple, most people know Apple, know who Apple is, know what Apple does, understands where most of their revenue comes from. So in a traditional setting, people think that, the way to make money through the stock market, if we're talking about Apple, is I can buy it, hope that it goes up, and I can sell it later for an increase, right? So you have to really have a bias for, upward movement, which, we call bullish. And then you also, depending on if you want a large, like the larger return, either you have to wait longer, right, for a greater and greater movement upward, or, right, you have to have it's a quantity game, right? So if it's not a time game, it's a quantity game. And what I mean by that is, if you're looking to make $1,000 on Apple in the next, year, then you would need to buy, and you expect a $10 move, then you would need at least 100 shares.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And for most people, that seems like a lot because Apple is trading right around 128, if I'm not mistaken. This
Yeah.
week, somewhere around 128, 130, around
Mm-hmm.
that range, right? So multiply that times 100. A lot of people is like, I don't have $13,000 just laying around,
Yeah.
right? So an option being a derivative is that it's tied to that stock.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not ownership of the asset, it's its own thing, right? They come in two flavors, calls and puts, right? So if you have that bullish bias, then you would be a purchaser of a call, which gives you the right, but not the obligation to 100 shares of Apple that are owned by somebody else between
Mm-hmm.
now and some agreed upon date in the future, right? For a specific price. That price is called a strike price. That timeline, that date in the future is called expiration date. And so there are things that tie that option to that underlying asset. They're called Greeks. And there's a correlation between those variables and the asset. So when Apple moves that $10 I talked about, then that option will move up a certain amount. It won't be dollar for dollar, which you could get to that point, right? If you buy what's called a deep in the money delta option, but not to get too far. But it's not a direct, dollar for dollar move.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The thing about it, the beauty, so getting back to the heart of the question, the beauty of it is that you're using leverage, right? Because you're buying a right but not ownership. You're getting the right to control something that's worth 13,000, right? Using the $130 a share.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something that's worth 13,000, and depending, let's use Delta 50, make it easy. So for every dollar that Apple moves up or down, and again, I know some people may know the Greeks and blacks. So go, well, Aubrey, there's other. Everything is equal. Everything else is equal. And we're just talking about delta,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if the delta of your call option is a 50, that means that it moves, right, half the distance in measurable unit, which is a dollar
Mm-hmm.
of the stock. So if Apple goes up a dollar, the option goes up 50 cents per share.
Yeah.
And there's 100 shares you control, so that would be a $50 increase in that asset that you own,
Yeah.
which is an option. So if Apple moves $10 in 6 months, your option theoretically, if everything else is equal, right? I know there's time decay, but you would have gained $500. Now, here's what I say about leverage. Think about that. If you own the shares, you made $1,000, but you had to spend 13,000. Do the math on that in terms of rate of return versus you for Delta 50, you probably would have spent, let's call it $2,500, right? And you made 500. That's a 20% net return.
Yeah.
Right. So for a lot smaller of amount of capital,
Yeah.
you can get greater returns than if you invest in the underlying asset itself, right? So that's the beauty of options is that leverage play.
Yeah.
Right? But the primary risk, in my answer with this, the primary risk is that when you own 100 shares of Apple, right? Apple can go down $50, right? But you don't have to get rid of it, right? Until you close out a position, you never lose money. Your asset depreciates,
Mm-hmm.
or appreciate, but you don't gain or lose until you close out that position. So you sell those shares, right? So you could, long as Apple never closes and they're around, you could hold Apple to infinity, right? You could pass it to your children, they could pass it to their children. But with an option, that expiration date, it is gone. It is bye-bye. It is Cinderella. That thing poof disappears,
Yeah.
right? So that 2,500 will go away. You better have a play for how to get out of that. And that's what, I have been studying for many, many years and learned how to deal with those strategies and what I coach people about.
Well, to talk about some successes and challenges that you've had with yourself and also client-wise, you don't have to speak about specific client names, but just talk about some successes and challenges.
So for me, I'll start with challenges. I like to end questions like that on a higher note.
Mm-hmm.
The challenges, I would say, are what I talked about, because it all ties together. What I talked about in the beginning about exposure and having access and experience people around me that are that I feel like they're comfortable with me and I'm comfortable with them.
Mm-hmm.
But I know I can make people comfortable with me if they're prejudiced at first. I don't know, but 9 times out of 10, right? I can get on a person's get in there and start talking. Like you say, I can work and
Mm-hmm.
get people guard down because I'm vulnerable. I can push that off and I can get people to open up. So, but you have to find that first, right? And again, a lot of that is inside families. A
Yeah.
lot of that is um, you got to climb corporate ladders before you have access,
Mm-hmm.
to certain personnel that have opportunity if you want to stay in that corporate structure or have knowledge that, quite frankly, on a lower level, they're just not exposed to,
Yeah.
right? That can bring you up. So you got to find it. So that's been the challenge is like, who do I trust? And if I can't validate somebody right off the bat, like, do I really want to go down this road and like vet this person myself? Do I really want to spend, if I really want to put capital, whether it's money in buying a course or
Mm-hmm.
time in reading through their course or studying their system,
Mm-hmm.
that's the biggest challenge. And again, because I know the answers out there, that was tough to go through a lot of layers of quite frankly BS and garbajo, like basura, bro. Like to go through all of that,
Yeah.
to get to the golden nugget, right? Or find that golden ticket. We're gonna go there with
Mm-hmm.
it. Like to find that golden ticket, I had to eat a whole lot of chocolate bars, and that ain't healthy,
Yeah.
right? Let me use that analogy. So that was like the biggest challenge. And then dealing with my emotional intelligence and childhood upbringing.
Yeah.
Not that I had I mean, from the lack of financial literacy. I had a great childhood upbringing. So I don't want anybody to
Mm-hmm.
misunderstand that. I'm talking about not having exposure to financial literature to bring me literacy as it pertains to consumerism, wealth accumulation, income generation, by making my money make money,
Yeah.
basic retirement skills, um, like you deal with, where I
Mm-hmm.
see on your post where you talk to people about estate planning, like stuff like that. That's been the biggest challenge is to like go through all of the junk. Where
Yeah.
again, ideally, our kids aren't going to have to go through that,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's the biggest challenge. Is sifting through the mounds and mounds because we live in the information age, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of junk out there. And yeah,
It
and if you don't know, if you don't have anybody to truly navigate you, man, you sort through a lot of junk and then dealing with, like I said, your emotional intelligence and the perceptions that you had about money because of your environment. That
is.
has been the biggest challenge. And successes would be, um, like I said, I'm 38 and I don't have to go not knocking it because I don't and I have the knowledge and the skill set to allow me to not have to go work for somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
That's the biggest. And my children, I can be around my children during the day. They're
Mm-hmm.
in school physically now. We just did that the last few weeks, but this whole school year they've been, e-learners at home. And that first, when I was teaching, right? I didn't have to. Again, it was a lifelong dream of mine. Like you said, it was a school similar to not like what we went to, but it was like a Granby,
Yeah.
right? And so I wanted to be in that type of environment because, like you said, I wanted to give these kids a vision because they would see me and they're like, "Oh, Mr. Bibbs, he rich, he got paper," and I'm like, we can talk about. You never asked me where I come from, like how I got here. Like you think I'm silver spoon because of how I dress in a tie every day. You got different,
Yeah.
tweet jacket. Like,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
they think Mr. Bibbs can relate, but that's why I want to do that. But my point is, the beauty of it is I can do my own thing like that. I can go to the local library and give a free class
Yeah.
on, something that's consumer advocate related, right?
Yep.
Which I do a lot. Like these, glad I just helped a family member who paid probably like 200 and some odd bucks for her glasses. And my household is 6 people in my house, right? We got 4 kids, me and my wife. And one year, everybody wears glasses. But my daughter, before she got prescription, so it was 5. So the 5 minus my daughter, the 5 of us got 2 pair of glasses for a total of like 250 bucks, 2 pair each, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's because of Clark Howard. Shout out to Clark Howard if he ever see this. I don't know if he will, right? So like Zimmy Optical, right? So I can get a pair of glasses for like 20 bucks out the door with anti-reflective and all that. So that's the type of thing that I can teach people about. Excuse me, that I'm able to inform people about because I've lived it and gone through it, and I know again that when you talk about traditional financial literacy, it's decrease your expenses and increase your income,
That's
right?
yep.
That's the whole formula they give you, right? But there's a whole bunch about this, right? Cutting coupons and cutting cable cord. There's not a whole much about this other than 10 steps to ask your boss for a raise. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
nah, man, tell me about Forex
Yeah.
and, how to trade stock options and,
Mm-hmm.
how to own real estate, right? How to have my own health billing business, right?
Yep.
Medical billing business and
Yep.
have an e-commerce shop. Nobody's teaching that. I mean, they are. You got to pay to play, but that's not in school. That ain't in a lot of households. But
Yep.
everybody cutting coupons and you know what I mean. Getting credit card reward points and all of that. So
That is very. I mean, that's very true. I mean, you go to school like you chose a route to go into the military. I chose a route to go to college. You go to college. A lot of people get out of college and still don't know exactly what they're going to do or how to apply what they've learned, and they end up working for a company that they probably didn't even anticipate working for because it's just how life kind of lands you. And so, but they don't talk about in school. They're not talking about, all right, how do you start certain businesses to create income so that way you're independent. And it's really about freedom. I mean, you just talking about everything you said. It's about the freedom to be able to do what you want to do and to live the life you want to live. And so that's what I think is most important about what you just said.
absolutely, Jeff. You nailed
If,
it, man.
if as you kind of talked about, you talked about some of your characteristics that have made you successful, just being analytical in the math. What strategies do you say that you've used to, I guess, increase your success with trading options and investing in stocks in general?
Yeah, that's another really good question, and I'm glad that you said something that I probably wouldn't have started answering it this way if you wouldn't have said that, right? To go back to like me mentioning that I love numbers and I have affinity for mathematics.
Yeah.
I want people to understand that does not have to be you. Those people are like, oh, I'm not good at math. I hate math. Yo, if you're one of those people and you really just deal with, you can still be extremely successful as a trader, right? Because it really is as complex. The complexity of it at most is what I explained in an example about an option having a delta 50, right? That if the underlying stock moves $1, then that option will move 50 cents per share times 100, $50. That's as complex as the math gets. So if you can go and watch a couple videos over and over and over and over again until you understand options, Greeks, specifically delta, maybe theta, that's as complex as it needs to get for you. Not to say that you can't study more. For example, like you go, oh, where does that come from? There's Black-Scholes model, and you nerd out about it. Cool, nerd out about stuff. But I'm telling you, and I'm defining success is what you said, Jeff, to get you to whatever your number of freedom is.
Yeah.
That means if you want to continue to do your 9 to 5, cool. But know that you can go and create income for yourself, that if you wanted to replace that, you have the peace of mind knowing that I'm already creating income that can replace this income. And I don't have to do this if I don't want to. I have the freedom to say, I'm going to pivot and follow some other thing in my heart. So you don't have to be like me. You don't have to have an affinity for math and be inclined to data and numbers. And like,
Mhm.
I love hearing stuff like that. I love reading articles and like, give me the good, give me the
Yeah.
numbers. So you don't have to be that way. So I want to preface with that. But the success tenets, if you will, for trading, it's specifically options
Hmm.
in my style is no different than investment tenets, which is you wanna right. Warren Buffett's rule number 1 and 2, right? You don't want to lose money. We're talking about risk management. So you always need to understand why you're dealing with a particular option. And ultimately what that means is look at the underlying. So if you're buying Apple options, right, for a hold to have appreciation of that option, or you want to trade against your option to
Hmm.
make income through premium, then and you're using Apple, you need to make sure that you like this is fundamental analysis, right?
Hmm.
So some technical, so you need to have some basic fundamental and technical analysis on that underlying. You need to have a entry and an exit strategy. It's all the same tenets that apply to investing for people who are looking to make income from trading, right? Be it to supplement or replace current expense needs. It it really is. You could literally study what people do as it pertains to investing. And if you can understand those tenets and follow those tenets, but learn a trading strategy, you literally can just pick up those things and develop a trading strategy based on investment tenets.
Hmm. I got you.
So
And
don't look to
an
go ahead.
investment tenants is the underlying equity or the organization that you're looking to invest in, whether it be Apple, Google,
Right.
Facebook, et cetera. Okay.
Right. Like following, because we're still retail, right? So we're retail traders. So like following institutions, right? If you're going to invest, my recommendation for investing, long-term investing is follow institutions, right? So if you're a self-directed investor, again, going back to like um, a brokerage account with your bank, or if you're in the military and have TSP, you don't really have that many options,
Mhm.
right? You have index funds essentially, right?
Yep.
And so, but even that, those are driven by right the primary indexes, right? So the SPY, for example,
Mhm.
S&P 500. So understand what type of asset classes, if they're primarily large cap, right? Which it's primarily upper mid cap, right, to large cap in the S&P 500. So if you want some exposure to like extreme growth, right, like some tech stuff, then you got to find an index that mimics like something else,
Yep.
right? So or if you like electric vehicles, so there's a sector that you like, you got to understand that. So my point is, you have to understand, even if you have a just not trading, but bringing it back, those investment principles are applicable in trading. The only difference is you're applying a technique that brings in income that you probably weren't aware of or exposed to and just
Mhm.
had no clue. And now it's like, okay, the mechanics of the trade is this.
Yep.
The premise and the setup is no different than what you do for if you're going to buy the stock that represents that derivative, that option.
Yep. Yep.
That's it. Because, and here's the why. Because if, let's say, you have to hold on, because I don't like to deal with shorter dated options, get into a little bit of specifics on strategy. So if
Hmm.
you're dealing with longer dated options, the mindset is you have time,
Hmm.
right, to for correction,
Yep.
right? What they call retracement. And then if, let's say, you own shares and you're trading options against the shares you own, the shares that you own are stocks that you wouldn't mind having to hold for 6 months.
Yep. Absolutely. Yep.
So that's why I say it's the foundation is the same things you would learn or you would employ for long-term holds
Yep.
initially, and then you're just putting on top of that some trading strategy which boils down to mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
I click what is language, right? Buy to open, sell to open, buy to close, sell to close, right? One contract, two contracts, expiration date, so forth and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Those are just basic language, right? That's just basic language of option strategy, and that's just learning vocabulary.
Mm-hmm. Now,
So,
now, buy to open, buy to close. Define it, just because I think it's good for some people. They hear things and don't. They
oh,
want.
sure, yeah, okay. So when you because options are rights, right, and not obligations, that right comes in the form of a contract between you as the buyer, and let's say we're the buyer, and the
Mm-hmm.
seller.
Mm-hmm.
So if going back to buy to open, so if I'm a buyer, and I want a particular expiration date and strike price, so those are the conditions of the contract.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any positions. I want to go into that contract. That's called opening a position. So I bought a contract and I'm opening a position.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't like the way that's going, right, and I'm monitoring that position, I want to get out of that, then I would, because I bought it and I opened it, I would do the opposite. I would be selling to close it.
I got you. Okay.
And then the converse. So selling to open
Mm-hmm.
would be a different strategy. So you would now be a seller of an option. So the same thing that where we bought the option
Mm-hmm.
and we opened it, that other person sold the option and opened it.
Yep.
So it was open to both of us because we opened up a contract together, but I bought it to open and they sold it to open.
That's right. And I think that's important to kind of define, because that's the other thing. Some people don't understand how the mechanics work around these contracts. And if I was selling to open, then that means I already own 100 shares of that
Absolutely.
specific stock. And so kind of what Aubrey's speaking to is just more, if I'm a seller, then I can collect the premium and either keep my shares or I have to sell the rights to those shares.
Yep.
And so, okay, talk about Absolute Truth, and then I have one speed round, and then we'll close it out there. So talk about Absolute Truth.
Yeah. So Absolute Truth, it's like an umbrella business for me. So the birth of Absolute Truth was the first thing that I did. Excuse me. Outside of that, when you talk about reducing expenses and increasing your income slash household revenue, because we like, it's better if you think of it as a business, right? So I like to use revenue, but so like increasing my revenue was getting into e-commerce business. And so, but the whole concept of Absolute Truth was about, again, me looking at it as the real truth to building wealth is dealing with your mindset and learning to, get into exploring all the different ways you can increase your revenue. And so in that process, the first thing I came across was e-commerce, and that got me. And so I registered, and that got, again, that concept pushed me to do all the things I needed to do that I wasn't familiar with or comfortable with, and that just led down to the road of me getting into. That was part of the process of me getting into trading beyond investing, and ultimately I realized that what I want to do through that is use that as a launching pad to facilitate financial literacy for others, right? Starting with people that are, close, near and dear to me, friends, family, co-workers that I've built bonds with, and share that knowledge that allows them to live that absolute truth of who they are within themselves. And so ultimately, take what's allowing me to live the absolute truth that's within me, spiritually, and help others bring that out of themselves. So what we do now is we still do e-commerce, but we're trying to pivot harder into helping others with financial literacy as it pertains to the stock market, and not just trading, but also investing. So my students now are, I don't just teach them trading strategies and show them how they can use options to bring in income or accelerate the growth of their nest egg, if you will, or their just self-directed account. I'm also teaching them how to invest and build wealth. So and then so they go and they make actions on their own. I'm a facilitator. I just educate.
Mm-hmm.
So we have instructional sessions, and then they take those instructional sessions and those lessons, and they go learn more. For example, let's say a student never had a brokerage account,
Mm-hmm.
and they go or self-direct, or maybe they have a brokerage account, but it's 401k, and they never had a self-directed account. So I'll teach them, what all brokerage accounts are, the different types, the benefits of each, the what you don't get, right? So the pros and cons of each. Then they make a decision, and then I help them through that process. So they might say, for instance, they might go, when I opened my account, it talked about margin. So
Mm-hmm.
I might give them a class on margin and explain the pros and cons of margin. Again, in a way that they can relate to,
Yep.
because they can go watch a video again on TD Ameritrade, which has great information for free, or YouTube, and again they'll go, man, they feel safe in me, and they don't. Again, it's that personal journey where if it wasn't me, I think they would be too embarrassed to ask certain questions. But
Yep.
because most of my students are people that I serve with, or that I've worked with in some capacity in the past, or friends of the family, and they feel comfortable. They can say, Aubrey, I watched the video. I didn't understand this. And I can give them instruction on it to help them better make a decision with strategies that I've exposed them to.
Yep. Yep.
And so that's what we do. We provide education and we provide coaching along the way, through your journey of getting experience through that education.
And Aubrey, I think that's great, and I definitely want to highlight that on this platform. So if you are watching, consider following Absolute Truth. Consider, one thing for sure. Like I said, I've known Aubrey for probably 30 years, since we were before we were teenagers.
Yeah.
And so I he's a guy I trust. He's a guy that I know is going to do right by whoever his clients decide to be, and the platform that he's started and that he's built, and I think the coaching and mentoring is a huge help, because there are a lot of people out there that just haven't started, and they need some advice from somebody that they trust. So I appreciate you kind of sharing more about Absolute Truth, and we would definitely make sure we highlight that, and continue to highlight that in some of the clips that we'll provide in this interview. So I always try to end it, and you've watched a few videos before. You
Yeah.
told me you had a chance to check them out. So I always go through a speed round of asking, to kind of lighten the mood a little bit, because whoever's been listening to this is probably either loving the interview, or they're like, all right, let's wrap it up, And so the speed round is just 5 questions, and then it give you a chance to kind of say, I'll ask you the questions, you just say the answers to their personal questions, to those questions. So just to kind of start off, what's your favorite book?
Man, that's tough. It fluctuates, but right now, my favorite book right now is The Science of Getting Rich by Wallace D. Waddles. So small,
Okay.
but just, man, it has a spiritual punch to it, bro.
Oh, okay, that's
Yeah.
good. Okay. First car.
Oh, my first car. Oh, I'm sorry. I felt like the vision just popped in my head. Man, that thing was so many trouble. Um, can I give an anecdote on it after I give the?
Yeah. Oh,
It was
absolutely.
1997 Plymouth Horizon.
Okay.
Like like sun dried tomato red. Like the hood paint was like all gone. Thank you, Lord, for Pamela Grant. I'm sorry, Pamela White. My mother's name is White now. Thank you, Lord, for Pamela White. That woman, I never forget. She went in there with her cash and dropped that cash and bought me my car when I was 16.
Oh yeah.
But I love that. That was a great experience having a car. Like one of the few kids that have a car at 16, even
Oh
from
yeah.
the hood,
Oh
right? But I love my little Plymouth Horizon. But,
yeah.
but that thing was so good to me. And you're talking about like I had a great 18th birthday, and I went to visit a family member with a good friend of ours, Justin Cuffey. Right,
Okay.
Justin
Yeah.
Cuffey
Yeah.
was with me. Him and my brother. We went to my aunt's house. I have an aunt that's just slightly older than me, 4 years my senior. So we like, she like a big sister. So naturally, I go to her for my birthday. She has something for me, and on the way back to the house, that vehicle caught on fire on the highway. Here's the story. This was funny about it. So I was in denial. So there's smoke on the highway, right? And my brother goes, "Your car on fire." And I said, "That ain't us. That's somebody in front of us getting the car fixed. Some dummy." And next thing you know, JC like, "No, that's you." And I pull over and I lift the hood and just flames come out that thing.
Oh man.
Yeah, I lost her that day.
Oh
So,
yeah.
on my birthday. I lost her on my 18th birthday.
Happy birthday to you. That's something
Man,
else.
my Plymouth Horizon, yeah. That's cool.
That is funny, man. What are you most proud of?
I'm most proud of what my wife and I have built. That's what I'm proud of. Everything that I have right now, it's Jeff. I can't put into words. It really is ineffable. So you know, it's not my career, is not my business. It is what me and my wife have built in terms of our family and everything that we like where we at right now as a family, everything that involves. That's what I'm proud of most because I know it's so much more greater coming. Like it's like that. Yeah. Again, I can't put it in words. That's what I'm proud of most is my family, my relationships, man.
Well, and I'll add something in there before I ask you this question.
Yeah.
Is for those that don't know, Aubrey's been married a long time,
Yeah.
and he has 4 kids, and he, they the young kids call it now, got it out the mud,
Yeah.
so they started from the bottom and they worked their way up, and so I'm proud to call him a friend and proud to watch his journey, and but yeah, that's a good thing to be proud of.
Proud of you too, bro. Yeah, man. 20 years strong this year. 20th anniversary this year.
Yep, that's a blessing, man. What's the biggest lesson that you learned?
Man, biggest lesson. It's a toss up, Jeff. Honestly, man, that's a really really good question for anybody that's self reflective.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very self reflective. I'm always looking like I'm not extremely critical, which I think a lot of people is very detrimental to a lot of people's mental health. I think people are self reflective but very critical on themselves. I don't know where. I thank God for whoever gave that lesson to me to not be so critical of myself. But I am. I do critique and I do expect right to improve and grow and get better, but I don't beat myself up.
Mm-hmm.
So, but great question, man. But I would say probably forgiveness. Right? I say it's a toss up. So that is very broad. Like we could talk about that all day, but just to like keep it tight with the speed round, forgiveness, and that includes myself and others, and timely forgiveness. Like not holding grudges, not taking things personal, understanding that people make mistakes and they're humans. Even if it does seem personal, a lot of times it's not personal.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite books is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People,
Mm-hmm.
and then also How to Win Friends and Influence People. Because what you get in there a lot is how to be a person who forgives and be considerate, have empathy. Because I didn't grow up being that much of an empathetic person. You would step on my sneakers and I want to punch you in the face. Right? So and not being critical. That's what you get in those books. But the discernment is it's also talking about you to you.
Mm-hmm.
So I won't get into the toss up, but because I'm clearly that resonates a lot. So just forgiveness, man. The ability to forgive.
Well, and last one, the end on a lighthearted note. Favorite movie.
Jeff, man, that's tough. I don't know. I don't have one. I don't think I have one. If put me on the spot, if I had to say something, I put it. I'm trying to think. If I was put on a desert island and there's like you get one movie.
Mm-hmm.
Friday. I love the laugh.
That's a good one. It
never gets old for me. Friday. I'll say Friday.
Friday definitely never gets old, man.
The original. I'm curious.
Well, listen. This interview was meant to kind of talk a little bit about one, your journey, but two, also just for those that are looking at investing, considering options, considering trading, to have some insight. Hopefully, those that listen got a great deal from it. And if you want to know more, just make sure you follow the Equity Partner, follow Absolute Truth, reach out to Aubrey Bibbs. And Aubrey, thank you for being an equity partner in whoever is watching this video in their journey, because that's what it's all about, just giving back information and resources to help somebody else reach those same levels. So I appreciate you. I appreciate you, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time, Jeff. And anybody who winds up watching this, I appreciate you watching us completely through. I appreciate having the opportunity to come on your platform and share a little bit of myself and my story. Again, like Jeff said, I'm an Absolute Truth LLC. That's the handle on Instagram. Hopefully I can give you some nuggets, and many blessings to you all in your future endeavors financially and everything outside of that. And Jeff, thank you so much, man. Many blessings to you, your family, and the equity partner. Appreciate you, brother.
I appreciate you too, man. Thank you.